you can keep all of this logged here. And the more information you put in here, the more people are able to learn about you on your profile, and also the more you have to look back on once you're trying to prepare everything for your apps. So definitely a lot of incentive on why to fill this out and keep it up to date. And this is actually the new updated version. So for those of you who haven't been on the site updating recently, I just want to show you how it's changed. To go ahead and add anything to your profile, you're going to go ahead and click on this little pen here, and it's going to bring you back to the previous looking version of the PreMed STAR profile. So just like last time, you can go ahead and put your stats in here, and then whenever you want to edit, just click up here on this little category here. So it's super, super easy. Make sure you fill those out. Reach out to any of the members who have really filled out profiles if you're struggling with yours, and it's a great way to kind of look at yourself holistically and see how you're doing in all these different areas. So big reason to go ahead and apply there. And as all of you know, tonight's webinar is going to be focused on your personal statement and letters of rec. So something else I wanted to show you was this DocShare. And inside DocShare, you can go ahead and upload any type of documents. So if I go to most recent here, you'll see that we actually have a lot of members who are sharing their personal statement. And let's see, let me scroll down. So you can see Corey, Megan put hers here. Megan actually matriculated into medical school, or she is about to matriculate into medical school. So if you're looking for insight on someone who had a great personal statement, go ahead and check out her little post here, so you can get some ideas on how to make yourself stand out. And you can actually share this with specific people on the site just so that they can edit it and give you any comments back. All right, and then one last thing I did mention before, just a little reminder to fill out your profiles because we do have recruiters on the site. So real quick, I just wanted to give a shout out to our new recruiter, Ryan Booth, who is from Western Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine. And you can actually go ahead and check out their school profile here. So this is inside the recruitment center. You can go ahead and click more details, and they're still working on filling out their site a little bit, but you can see that they do have a video here, and they give you a little bit of information in terms of their stats and also tuition. If you want more information, they do have their school website down here, all right? And so without further ado, I want to welcome in Jessica. She is a medical student at Charles Drew School of Medicine. So she's going to go ahead and come up on the screen and share with you guys about writing your personal statement and gaining strong letters of recommendation.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen here, and then I'll introduce myself a little bit and kind of give you an idea of what we'll be doing. And Lauren, you can see that, everyone?
Yes.
Okay, so everyone else should be able to see it. So like Lauren said, I am a medical student currently at the Drew UCLA program. If you didn't know, Drew is a small HBCU that is affiliated with the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. Our program accepts between 28 and 30 students every year. And those are students who are interested in underserved medicine or serving underserved communities. So you apply directly through the MCAT application under Drew, which is a separate application from the UCLA program. But we're dual enrolled, so we attend the same classes. We have some of the same rotation options. The only difference is during your third year, you would do rotations at more of the county hospitals as opposed to the private hospitals in Los Angeles. So if that's something you're interested in, I can definitely answer questions about that later. I'm also a postbac. I also was a postbac student. I did the med prep postbac in Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois, and I was a non-science major. I majored in women's studies and Spanish pre-med. So if you have any questions about some of those non-traditional routes, I did a gap year as well. So kind of could just cover all those non-traditional things. But if you can see on the screen here, this is going to be just a quick outline of what we're going to go through today. I'll talk a little bit about the personal statement, how you should get letters of recommendation and how to get good letters of recommendation, a timeline for how you can expect things to go in the next couple of months if you're applying this year in regards to your letter of recommendation and the application, and then just any questions that you have in the end. Just a little shout out, I have a personal consulting business for pre-meds, and I help edit personal statements, applications, and all of that. So that's kind of where my background with this comes from. So let's go ahead and get started with what you can do with your personal statement. Give me 1 second. Here we go. Okay, so the goal of your personal statement is to craft your story. You want your personal statement to be 3 things mainly. You want it to be true. You never want to have any stretched truths or lies in your statement to make it more interesting. You want it to be captivating, and you want it to be relevant. And the way that I think about it when people are like, I've never written a personal statement before, I have no idea where to start, you're mainly answering 2 questions. Who are you and why medicine? And you're trying to do that in the most creative and captivating way possible. So who are you? You want to catch their attention in the first paragraph. In general, you're looking to write about 2 pages, but there are actual word limits within the AMCAT and ACOMAS applications. So make sure you are mindful of those. In terms of language, you want to be using your best grammar, your best vocabulary, and a few of the keywords that I'll go over at the bottom of the screen in a minute. And in general, you just want to make sure that the essay flows and that it sounds like you. And so the way to do this is either to read it to yourself or have someone else read it to you out loud, and make sure that it sounds like the way you normally speak, you know, a little bit better than the way you normally speak, but it's still your voice. And so we'll talk a little bit about what I mean by keywords, and then we'll go into the parts of how to make a personal statement. So my postbac program had a committee letter, and in this committee letter, they would compile all of your different recommendation letters and then give their overall recommendation. So these are some keywords that were on the form that we had to give to our letter writers. And these are some of the characteristics that you kind of want to be thinking about. So a good way to start is to make a list of all of the skills that you think a great physician would have and a great medical student could have. And you want to include these descriptors throughout your personal statement and throughout the essays that you're going to be writing, whether that's in the activities or secondaries or whatever writing you're going to be doing. And so, for example, those can include leadership, willingness to accept responsibility for one's learning, integrity, time utilization skills. So there's a lot of examples of different words, but those are kind of what you want to make sure you throw in your essay at various points. I'm going to go through a little bit of the chunks of what are within that essay, but this is just an outline to give you an idea of what it should contain. It's not a strict rule book for how exactly it needs to go. So in general, when you're doing your introduction, the thing that I like to think about if I don't know where to start is, when was the first moment you realized you were destined to be a doctor? So keep in mind that they'll see thousands of applications, but nobody's will be exactly like your experiences. And that's what you really want to highlight on. And more than anything, you want to convince them from this short statement that you're a person that they want to continue to have a conversation with in an interview. In general, I try to avoid statements like, I wanted to be a doctor since I was a little kid, or I want to be a doctor because I want to help people, because those are the kind of things that you're going to see throughout a lot of essays. So unless you have a way of spinning that really creatively, you kind of want to be a little more specific than that. Next, you want to talk about your background. So tell your story about what has shaped you into a prepared medical student. And if you have a completed undergraduate career, talk about your coursework or your major. If you have direct experience with health disparities or worked with people who have health disparities, talk about that. Any volunteer efforts. Those are just kind of examples of what you can include in your background story. You do not want to copy and paste your resume or CV. Because it will look lazy, and also because they have all of that information within your application. And so you don't want to waste an opportunity for them to really want to be able to speak to you by repeating the same things that you already had in the application. So maybe you have a really impactful experience, but it doesn't really classify as one of those most meaningful experiences, but you want to expand on it a little bit. That's a time that you can use your personal statement to do so. Another thing you want to discuss is growth. Who are you now? Bring them up to date on who you are now versus either when you are an undergrad, if you already graduated, or how you were as a student at the beginning of undergrad. or any earlier years, earlier years of undergrad. So if you did a post-bac program, how has that enhanced your preparedness for medical school? If you've done research or global endeavors, maybe you've done some volunteer traveling, those are all things that you want to talk about. In particular, I think that it's important to remember that you see your bad grades, you see your low MCAT score, you see the points that you've messed up on your application. That means they can see it too. And so you want to be able to get your foot in the door and get it to an interview to show them that you're more than that mishap. And to make that happen, you can't skirt around it and hope they don't see it. So this is the part to address that. Maybe you struggled in first semester because you had some family things going on at the beginning of school, but your grades have been increasing. That's something you can talk about in terms of growth. And I will leave this presentation for anyone who's not able to stay through the whole thing or wants to flip back to some screens. Finally, you want to close it out and bring it all home. Remind them how you're a unique and diverse individual and what you can bring for the diversity of their school. You want to state your commitments and your personal goals. I want to be this type of physician and I'm prepared in these kind of ways. And just in general, end it with confidence. This is your time to humbly brag about, these are the things that I've done and this is why I'm perfect for your medical school. A key point to keep in mind, not only with the personal statement, but when you're writing your letters of recommendation, when you're requesting your letters of recommendation, when you're writing about your activities, maybe a school has you on a wait list and they want you to send an addendum telling them that you're still interested. So tie that in to your preparedness for medicine. Everything you write about should be tied into your preparedness for medicine or why you're choosing to do medicine. For example, if you did a volunteer activity, when you're writing about your activities, you should never just put, I did this activity and this is how long I did it for. It should be, I did this activity, my role was this, the skills or lessons that I learned are these. They directly relate to how it can make me a good physician, because physicians also have to have patience. So just an example like that. Okay, before we do letters of recommendation, I'm just gonna quickly check some of your questions that you guys had. So an example of explaining a low MCAT score without making it seem like excuses. Well, I am an example of that. I took the MCAT 4 times, which is not ideal. But there were real situations in that I was not being honest with myself about how to prepare, or I hadn't really looked at any practice exams. And so those are things that I wrote about in my personal statement, and I'll provide that for you all also, but that I talked about that section in terms of ways that my post-bac helped me grow. Not only as a student and teaching me how to test better, but also knowing how to recognize when I need help and learning how to use my resources to get help. So in a way, it sounds like, they're not per se excuses, but they are explanations for why you performed the way that you did. And the way that you can keep those explanations from being excuses is to show that you're on an up and up trajectory. Your grades got better, your MCAT score got better. So for example, I know you guys have the new MCAT score, but I'm just going by the old numbers. So when I first came in, and I don't mind saying my MCAT score because I'm in school and it doesn't matter anymore. But when I first took the MCAT, I got a 15. And it's like, what can anyone do with that? And then when I was done, I got a 27. And so it's like that transition and that struggle is not as important as showing that I've learned a lesson from that. And the student you're getting as a medical student is not the student that got that 15. So that's another thing to think about. I'm going to go ahead through letters of recommendation, and then I'll answer some more of your questions. So letters of recommendation, it's never too early to start your list of people you may ask. If you're going into some upper level science courses that this class is gonna look good, like I'm taking histology or I'm taking anatomy or physiology, and I know that that's something that a medical school would look for. So I need to kill this class and get an A. And if I can get a recommendation from this teacher or this well-known researcher, that would be even more amazing. So let them know from the beginning, like, hey, I am planning on applying to medical school this coming year or next year. Would you be willing to keep an eye on my performance and give me feedback so that I can eventually get a recommendation letter from you? So please make sure that you know your recommenders, that they like you, and they can be almost anyone, academic, professional, any volunteer coordinators, things of that nature. So who should you ask for your letters of recommendation? You should ideally have 1 or 2 letters from a science instructor or a PI if you're doing research, and 1 from a professional acquaintance. For a COMIS, which is the DO, previously I know that a lot of advisors would say you should have a DO doctor. I did not have a letter from a DO physician and still had interviews with DO schools, so I'm not sure how much that holds true either then or now. So you might want to check with some other DO physicians or DL medical students that you know to see if that's still an important criteria. Attachments. So when you write your requests, your email, I did a lot of email and a few in-person requests for letter of recommendations, but in general, you want to make sure that you provide your letter writers with a copy of your personal statement. So that should really be done first. A copy of your latest academic or work resume and CV, and any committee or MCAT or COMIS forms that need to accompany your letter of recommendation. So like I said, my post-bac had a committee letter and they had a particular form that they wanted to have go with it. So that's something that you should include in the email for them to have. Reminders, you want to give your letter writers plenty of notice and send out reminders at a 4-week and 2-week pre-deadline mark. If they haven't submitted the letter yet, just send out kind reminders. If it's still not submitted within like 4 or 5 days, or it's the week before, check to make sure they still plan to write one. And use your best judgment and understand your relationship so as not to seem like you're pestering them. But I have a really close relationship with most of my mentors and people who recommended me, and I do know, and they know, that some of them tend to be a little forgetful or get really busy with their research. So if I saw them, it would be, you know, hey, don't forget the recommendation letter I need is due in 2 weeks. It's 4 days before. Did you send it in yet? So just understand your relationship to kind of see how frequently you should check in with them. Committee letters. If your program offers one, you should include it. Give your letter writers plenty of time to submit their recommendation to the committee and for the committee to review it. This is an example of one of the emails that I sent to my recommender, my letter writer, and you'll get a copy of this again so you can kind of see how it was formatted. And this, the bad aspect of this was in the year when I submitted and then dropped the application, so this was not submitted. But if you see that date, that's late. I don't want anyone to have that date. You want to get these letters to them as soon as possible so that they can turn it in to either your committee or to MCAS or a COMIS directly. Okay, let me see a few more questions before we go on to our timeline for things. I will leave my info for editing personal statements. And I think it's being recorded. If you're writing about a tragedy, how can we avoid it being too sad? I mean, a tragedy is going to be sad. I think that that's a good thing to think about, and especially for interviews, and making sure that you have an answer prepared and run through that with someone so that you won't get too thrown off or choked up, particularly during an interview. When writing about a tragedy, if that was something that affected your grades, I don't think you have to go too much into detail. Like if you lost a loved one or you experienced, you kind of just want to keep it broad. Like I experienced a serious financial hardship, or I lost a very dear family member of mine passed away, or something along, you know, any kind of tragedy. Just keep it open and more focus on the ways that it affected you then and how you dealt with it or plan to deal with it. A number of my classmates while in medical school, unfortunately, continue to experience loss of loved ones or tragedies. And the reason why it's important to talk about that is because life doesn't stop when you're in med school. So they want to make sure that you know how to cope or who to turn to if you're not sure how to cope, so that they know that you won't, go through a struggle of trying to figure out what to do or how to survive if that were to happen again. Hopefully that answered your question. Let me know if it didn't. Does it have to be 2 science professors and 1 non-science for a letter of recommendation? It doesn't have to be. My particular committee gave us a lot of guidelines on what they specifically wanted. I had 1 science professor, 1 mentor of mine who was a physician, and we had worked in some capacity on like volunteer things, but she never directly taught me and I never directly shadowed her. It was more a professional relationship. And I did have a non-science because I was a non-science major, but it doesn't particularly have to be that. They should have official letterhead. If the physician has a letterhead that they created themselves, that's fine. In general, if they have official letterhead, they should use it. And they should always include the letter of recommendation with your AMCAS recommendation letter that you'll provide to them to make sure that it will go with your file. And that's the most important thing about making sure you put that recommendation letter official correspondence paper from AMCAS or COMIS with your letter, because you want to make sure that your file number for AMCAS is connected to that recommendation letter that they're going to give you, so there won't be any delays in making sure that it gets into the right file. How do you explain your medical experience without making it seem like you are repeating your CV or resume? If that's a particular activity that you feel influenced you and you haven't really talked about it in your application, then that's how you can kind of bring it into the personal statement. In general, when I say don't repeat your CV and resume, I mean don't copy and paste, like essentially, and just put it into a sentence. From 2016 to 2018, I volunteered here, and then go on to like list all your medical experiences. You should especially be talking about ways that it impacted you and ways that it prepared you for medical school. What if you have not done a whole lot of shadowing? How will that affect your application and being prepared and interested for medicine? There's a lot of ways that you can be prepared for medicine without directly shadowing. If you've volunteered, I had volunteered in an emergency room, and I thought it was going to be me like kind of shadowing. And essentially I was wiping down hospital beds and disinfecting equipment. Not clinical at all, but it allowed me to witness the dynamics between the nurses and the physicians and the PAs and all the different patients, and just get an understanding of how these hospitals worked, and behind the scenes seeing all the paperwork they were doing. So there's always a way to kind of be aware of what you've taken from those experiences and find a way to spin it into some writing. And in general, just kind of write it out, and we can edit it from there, or have someone or an advisor look over and edit it from there. I didn't have a whole lot of shadowing, but it didn't affect my application because of other experiences that I had had. So you shouldn't let that limit you. Is it appropriate to expand upon your most meaningful activities in your personal statement? You can, and I think I had like an aspect of one of my meaningful activities that kind of tied into another experience in post-bac. In general, your meaningful experience, like the part that you wrote for that, should be substantial enough to explain that activity. And you just don't want to lose an opportunity to tell them more about yourself by repeating kind of the same thing that you had in meaningful activity. So you can expound on it, especially if you feel like that section was too short and you didn't get to really tell the whole meaning of what it meant to you, then definitely expand on that in your personal statement. But you don't want to have like a copy of your meaningful activity and then list an explanation. It needs to be 2 separate pieces of writing. Besides professors, who else do you recommend for a letter of recommendation? If you are in a religious group and maybe you're a member of your church choir and it's not, related to medicine directly, but you go to choir on time every week, and that's a commitment that you've had. So it shows like your dedication and your diligence and the importance of your faith to you. So those are all important things. So it doesn't have to be limited to that. You do want to try and get a science professor or a recent graduate professor if you're doing an MPH or an MBA, because they can attest to your work as a graduate student. You mainly want someone who can tell that you study well and you're committed, or who can tell that you have great work ethic and you know how to come to things on time and you know how to do what you say you're gonna do. So it doesn't have to be just professors. If I didn't get to receive a rec from a non-science professor, does it look bad? 2 science professors and 2 doctors. No, it doesn't look bad. Again, these are just recommendations that my postbac had for us and what they wanted from a committee letter. But if you have good recommendations, that's fine. What I also put in the example that I think is the most important is when you're asking people for a letter of recommendation, and I'll go back to it so you can see. This is important. You want to ask them, I want to request an enthusiastic letter of recommendation, or I want an excellent letter. Are you able to write an excellent letter, a great letter, enthusiastic, extremely supportive? Let it be very clear that you are looking for a great letter of recommendation. You don't want a generic one. You don't want a good one. You want to make sure that people that you're asking for these letters can give you them. And they'll be honest. I had one teacher who told me, you know, this class is way too big. I don't really get to directly interact with a lot of my students. I only have you for this one semester, and I normally don't write letters of recommendation for this class. Cool. There's no begging her to write me a letter, because I can tell you right now it's not going to be as good as a letter that somebody else would write for me. So when you present it exactly what you're expecting, take heed of what they tell you, because you don't want to take a letter that's not as great. Okay, I'm going to go through the timeline and then I'll come back and answer the rest of the questions here, just to make sure we get through everything. And then if anyone wants to, we can go through the rest of the questions. So in general, for your timeline, you want to start your personal statement now. This is going to be something that you're going to spend a lot of time on. And if you're done with your personal statement and it's been edited and you feel confident with it, then you need to start working on your activities, because your activities are going to use a similar structure, and they should also take a lot of time. And I think people really spend time on the personal statement, and then their activities kind of read like their resume. Like, I did this and this, and I did this many hours, and it was a great experience. Like, you need to, again, be connecting everything to medicine. I learned this. It taught me this type of skill or characteristic. And I think that that's important, because I need to use this type of skill with my patients. Or I think that this is an important, this was an important experience because it taught me the value of being on time, which is important as a physician. Like, it all has to tie back to medicine. So if each activity does not have you directing it to some way in that you're going to be a great medical student or eventually a great physician, researcher, or clinician, then you need to be spending some more time on those. Download and send your letter of recommendation cover letters with your request. So that's going to be from ACOMAS or from MCAT specifically. Download that and put it with your request. And that you can do that now. AMCAS, you should not wait to receive your letter of recommendations before you submit your application. So the application opened already on May 2nd. And that means that you have access to filling it out. You can fill out all the demographics. You can upload your grades, your personal statement, activities. You can list who your letter writers will be. All of that you can do now. You can print out the paper that you have to take to your records office and get your official transcript from every school you went to. If you did summer school between first and second year of undergrad at some community college back home, you need to have that transcript. If you did study abroad and your school directly does not have an agreement between your study abroad school and your school, so you have some grades out there, you need to get that transcript. May 31st it opens, and you can submit your application then. What about APs? Sorry, APs, you don't need your high school or dual enrollment. You don't need your high school transcript. And usually dual enrollment has an agreement with the other school that your grades will be directly reflected on your transcript. So you shouldn't need a transcript for that either. You might want to call AMCAS and double check, but 99.9% sure that you don't need the dual enrollment transcript. So June 29th, applications will be released to your medical schools. That means secondaries will arrive. I've made this short URL that you guys can use to get access to the secondary prompts already. So it's tinyurl.com/medsecond. And what this basically means is that from now until you're done with secondaries, you're going to be writing a lot. So you're going to be writing your personal statement. And then when you're done, you'll be writing your activities. And then when you're done, you'll be writing your secondaries, even if they didn't arrive yet, particularly from the schools that automatically send secondaries, because you want to have a quick turnaround and get those back to the school within a couple days to a week. Same thing for ACOMAS, the DO applications. Don't wait on your letters to submit. The application opened May 3rd, and for you guys, it takes approximately 2 weeks for your application to be processed and verified. In mid-June, the first ACOMAS apps are released to the DO schools, so you'll start getting secondaries as well. So you can use that same URL. It lists both MD and DO school secondary prompts. So again, this is the information for the business that I have. It's down for the week because we're doing a couple website changes, but in general, that's where you can find me if you have any questions, if you want to schedule any sessions. I'm going to go through the rest of your questions here. And if I didn't answer it directly, then just make another post and let me know what I missed. I'm going to catch you guys from the Q&A side. How would a personal statement differ from a traditional versus non-traditional student? Would there be a significant difference? I think there is a significant difference in that, think about the timeline of it. If I did directly into undergrad, that's going to be, you know, when I'm writing my personal statement, I'm writing things that are very recent. If I did high school and then I took a gap year, and then I did undergrad, but things happened in my family, so I had to take off time to leave, and then I came back. And then I did a post-bac, and then I worked. And now I'm doing medical school applications. That's going to be different in terms of what was the most impactful time during those different stages in my life in terms of preparing me for medical school and to be a physician. And then also, what are my most recent grades? Maybe you had great grades as an undergrad in the beginning, but your graduate school grades aren't that great. That's a concern. But maybe it's the other way around. So it's going to change in terms of what you focus on. But again, overall, the point of it is to tell your story. So that's going to be your main focus. How do most schools consider a low undergrad GPA with a high post-bac GPA? In general, your post-bac GPA and your master's or graduate school GPA is weighed a little more heavily because that shows you with a graduate level type of coursework and showing that you're able to handle the rigor of that. In addition to, a lot of times people have to work during those programs. So were you balancing two things and still getting good grades? But that doesn't mean you can ignore the fact that, you know, maybe you had a failed science class in undergrad, or even like a little string of C's in science classes in undergrad before you did a post-bac. That's kind of what my personal statement focused on a little bit, is how my study habits had changed in post-bac. And so again, this is the type of student you're getting versus the type of student that I was before. So that's why it tends to be a little bit of a more focus on the latter part of your academic record. I'm going to go back to the chat and see some other questions we had in here. Okay. So we talked about some of the, what is a recommendation? Okay, this is a good one. If a professor asks you to write the letter of recommendation, how can you use that to your advantage or avoid making it sound similar to another template you had to draft for another professor? I've noticed that a lot of professors, I didn't have any professors who particularly did this, but this is going to be where it's good to use your academic advisor or your mentors to kind of help you navigate how to write about yourself and to make sure that it's not all the same essay. Definitely use it to your advantage and be honest in terms of highlighting what you think you did well in that class. So maybe you showed up on time, you did, you took leadership in your small groups, you stayed after, you went to their office hours, you took initiative on projects. Like, just in general, think of what are the things that would make a great medical student, or what am I proud of that I did in that class? And then if there were things that you weren't proud of, just talk about the growth that you gained from that. Like, growth and who you are as a student are two of the, and how you've grown as a student and who you are now preparing to enter medical school are two of the best things you can talk about, and once you've had some difficulties in the past. Hopefully that answers your question, but definitely seek out an advisor who is familiar with your academic record, who can make sure and give them, kind of both copies of the letter and make sure that it's not too similar. If you're having difficulty with your personal statement, I would just go back into the presentation and at the beginning and kind of answer some of those questions that I posted, like what they have to feel the passion in your application, like in this statement, like, and for me, that comes from like, when did I first know I wanted to be a doctor, or what are the motivating factors for that? And I think just start there and just start writing. And then on another page, what are some academic struggles I've had, and why, honestly, with myself, why did I struggle? Did I not study? Was I not motivated? Or was something else going on? And write about that. And then what do I want to be? How do I envision my perfect career? What specialty do I want to go into? What communities do I want to work with? And then eventually you'll have 3 pages and you can kind of just start picking the most important things and can narrow it down. So that's kind of just the way that I would start it. In terms of the disadvantage section, I think, of course, there's going to be, if you're coming from a racially diverse background or underrepresented background, that's one aspect. Financially, that's another aspect. Maybe you didn't have access to a lot of the good schools or additional programs that other students had access to. Maybe you're a first-generation college student. Nobody from your family has gone to college or medical school before, or graduate school. Maybe you come from an area that doesn't have great public schools, so you had to go to, schools outside of your district, and you had to get up really early in the morning to be able to go to high schools and then do your own research to figure out how to best get into colleges. And so those are definitely things that can go in that section for disadvantage. As the reapplicant, what would change in your personal statement? You definitely don't want to submit the same personal statement you submitted before. There should be something that's changed in the past year. If you didn't get any type of interviews and you called those schools or kind of saw what needed to change, or maybe you can talk about what kind of things you've done to work on yourself academically, or maybe your academics were finding you didn't have any type of like volunteer experiences. Talk about how that's changed you. If you're a reapplicant and you haven't done anything from the last year, then I think you need to just sit and figure out if this is the time, like if you're ready to do this year. And that's not a diss in any way. It just means like you have to convince yourself that something's different and that you're now prepared as a medical student and be able to talk about that. Otherwise, they're not going to feel it in your personal statement. And if you get an interview, they're definitely not going to see it on your face. And it's worse. I personally think it's more hurtful to make it through an interview and have met someone and then get that denial, as opposed to like never meeting with them and getting a denial, because that means something that you said like didn't translate as well for them, usually, not always. Everyone tells me I need to reflect on what I've done in order to write a good personal statement. How do I carry out that reflection? I think we've talked a lot about that. Again, growth and figuring out what kind of changes. And I think more than anything, you should be convinced, first of all, that you're ready for medical school and that you deserve that seat. And that reflection is going to be, how do I know that I'm ready? Like, how do I know that I've done well, or that, maybe you took a challenging course and you didn't want to sign up for advanced genetics, but you did, and you got an A or you got a B and you thought you would fail. Like, that's a reflection in terms of like gaining confidence and making sure that you are committing yourself entirely to something that you know you have to do. You committed yourself and you get it done and you did well. That's an example of like how you can reflect on that. I emailed some letter of recommendations a few weeks ago and they still have not written back. How do I go about asking them if they saw my email requesting for a letter of rec? If you know them in person, I would directly go up to them and speak to them either after class or during office hours. I would say office hours or try and schedule an appointment with them, because if they did see your email and they don't think they can write an enthusiastic letter, that's something you need to know. And that's something you need to like, so you can know if you need to find out if you need to find other letter writers. Or if they just didn't see it, then you can have a chance to talk to them in person. Hey, here's my activities list. This is the class I took with you and I got this grade. Like, remind them who you are also, because they might be avoiding it because they don't know what class they had you for. My committee was very strict with GPA and MCAT requirements, unfortunately, so I will have to do individual letters. Does that look bad? I had classmates from my post-bac who were in a similar situation. They were very strict with what the MCAT cutoff was. And so some of those students did go directly to instructors and get a committee letter. And a few of those students still got into med school. So does it look bad? Maybe. Does it look, it probably doesn't look great if the medical school knows that your program does committee letters, but will that keep you from getting into medical school? No. And there's not like hard and fast rules for what will get you in and what won't get you in, because I've kind of seen a little bit of everything. Like, should I have gotten into schools with 4 MCATs? Probably not, but did I? Yes. So, you know, that's when the importance of being able to write these good personal statements and get your foot in the door and working your butt off on your interviews, because we can deal with all those shortcomings, but if you can show that you're going to be the best student in their program. Does a math professor count as a science professor that I can get a letter of recommendation for? So AMCAS includes math in the calculation of your science GPA. So I would say that in that regard, it does count. But if you weren't a math major and you were some type of science major, I would still try and get a letter from some professor. And if you're not applying this year, then maybe see if there's some research you can do with them in the summer, or just giving them a chance to understand your work ethic more so that you can get a letter of recommendation. What are some tips on how to talk more to physicians that you work with to get to know them and vice versa in order to have a better chance at them writing a letter of recommendation for you? I worked as a scribe, but I'm afraid to talk to them about things other than work because they seem busy and I don't want to bother them. They probably are busy because you've seen that they're busy, but that doesn't mean, for most of the physicians that I've met, when they know that you want to go into medicine, they are ready to take you under their wing and tell you more information than you want to know. So I think that you should get over that fear, because there's going to be a lot of times when you're going to have to speak up for some opportunity that you want in medical school. And it's hard, because I used to kind of be like, oh, I don't really want to bother anyone either, but take a deep breath and get over that fear, and definitely respect their time and let them know, you know, I'm interested in applying to medical school. Is there some time that you can talk, maybe over a lunch break, or if there's an email, I can send you an email over the weekend, or just find out what's the best way to talk to them and get an opportunity to get their input on things. Everyone, okay. I think if this is your second time applying, we did that one. Do you have to talk about your job even if it's not medically related, and what you learned, how you grew from it in relation to medicine? If that job took up a good chunk of your time, like say you took off a year and that was your job, I would write about it, just because they're going to look at your timeline and be like, okay, what was this person doing from this year to this year? Were they out of the country? Were they working? Why didn't they tell us about their job? So I would talk about it, and everything can be spun like medically related, meaning that there is some skill that you gained from that, even if that just meant showing up one time and doing a job that you didn't really want to do, because maybe there's a rotation that you might not be that interested in, and you're going to have to do it just to show that that's your responsibility and you're taking accountability for your responsibilities. And so there's a way to spin that. How would you overcome writing block? I think you just have to write anything that's my method, is like write anything that comes to your mind. And we can edit it out later, but just put down as much as you can. And so like I said for the person earlier, go back to the presentation and see some of those questions that I asked, kind of to give you an idea for where to start. Just answer them as much as you can, just write all you can write and edit it later. So we'll cut it down short later. Should I limit my letter of recommendations to what I think are the 3 strongest to be submitted if I have 4 total? I think 4 are okay. Again, I only said 3 or 4 because that's what my committee wanted. You don't want to be submitting 10 because who wants to read that many each person? But if you have 4 really good ones, I think you should still submit all 4. How long does it take to process an application by MCAT? That depends every year on how many people are submitting and how prepared MCAT is for that number. My year, there were a lot more people submitting to medical school than the year prior, and so it took longer for it to process. So my application, I submitted on the very first day that MCAT opened, or that might be too ambitious. It was the first week at least, and it took 5 weeks for it to process. People who entered their application in a week later than me were waiting 6 to 8 weeks. So on average, you can expect it to be 6 to 8 weeks processing time, less time the earlier you submit it. So that's the benefit of submitting it early. Make sure that you do not, make sure you get your transcript and enter and compare your grades specifically from that. Because if you enter your grades from a transcript and it's not specific to, and it doesn't match up with your transcript, it's going to get rejected, and then you're going to have to be delayed, and you won't be at the beginning of that processing line anymore. You'll be in there with the same people who submitted after you. Are there any consequences of submitting your applications after May 31st but before June 29th? There aren't consequences per se in submitting it later than that first day it opens, but you are going to, again, be looking at a longer processing time, which means the schools will get your application later, you'll get your secondaries later, you'll get your interviews later, and so you're just looking at a longer timeline for things. What if your grades started off well in your first year and second semester of sophomore year, your grades slipped? I'm working really hard now to grow, and I know that I will improve, but how do I explain if they ask about this in an interview? I think definitely figuring out, first, okay, so let me see, they started off well first year. It sounds like you might have gotten into your science major and actually started your science courses around second semester sophomore year or junior year, which could be why your grades slipped. I would say you need to see how your grades are going to improve, and that might be an instance where you might want to consider a post-bac if they're not up to the level that you're expecting them to be in order to be competitive in that school. I can talk to you a little bit more personally to see exactly what you mean, so I'll give you my email. I emailed some professors for letters of rec a few weeks ago. Okay, I think we talked about that one. If you're a reapplicant, they can, if you submitted your application and it processed and was sent to schools, you're a reapplicant and they can see that. And you should talk about the differences and like the growth that you've had since then. If you submitted your application and it wasn't processed, like I submitted the first year and I pulled it out because I got my MCAT and I was like, no, I can't submit yet. But my application never processed. I'm not a reapplicant, so you don't have to mention it. Okay, we talked about that one. How do you send a transcript if a university has to mail it and I am not able to add the AAMC number? So this can be difficult. I sent, either you have to personally take it to them, to the transcript office and let them know this has to be attached with my transcript when you send the request, or you have to call the university's office and figure out how you can fax or mail or email a copy of that, because it has to be put with your transcript for it to not be separated. What if the person I'm writing the letter to is not an academic professor? We kind of talked a little bit about that. That's fine. If you applied to medical school before and have to make a new personal statement, do these guidelines apply to me? The general direction of writing the personal statement will apply to you, Like I said to the last person who was wondering about a reapplicant, you do want to talk about what you've done in that time and kind of like what you've learned before and how you're more prepared at this time. The TinyURL website for my business's website is down until Sunday, but the other one should still work. Does working through school full-time count as disadvantage? You could talk about it in the disadvantage statement in terms of financial difficulties. I definitely mentioned that in mine, in that I didn't have parents who could barely do for themselves, let alone provide for me as an adult in school. So I did have to work throughout college, and so that's something you can talk about for that. You want a person using a story to start their personal statement? That's fine. I think that's one of the creative ways that people started. Some people use stories, some people use quotes, some people jump right into it. As long as it's true to you and a true statement and captivating, then that's fine. I have moved across the country for a post-bac master's. Seeing them right now is not really possible. Is there another way to ask without approaching? I'm gonna send you my email too. So I'll just put this. If I'm telling you like, hey, you might have a personal thing I wanna like talk more about you with, you can send me an email. Other than that, anyone else is free to send me an email. Just give me some time to respond to it. So hopefully I get most of your questions now. But there are like 2 people already who have had really specific situations. I'm starting out as a scribe in a week. Is there any recommendation for how I should approach them about advice about medicine and a rec letter? I would wait until you've been there for about a week or 2, at least, and can kind of navigate who's around and like who would be a good person to ask and more figure it out, so you're kind of not approaching everybody. You don't have to wait. Again, you don't have to wait on your recommendation letter to submit your application, so that shouldn't hold you up. But you should kind of figure out who specifically you're going to ask, and then, like I said, just set up a meeting with them or see if you can call them, because you don't want to take up their work time to kind of discuss about your plans for medicine. So just definitely be respectful of their time. Okay, there's answers for that one. Should I still use my undergrad professor rec if I have 2 post-bac professors? Even though it's older, I think it was a good rec since I did research with him. You should definitely use him as an undergrad rec. As a letter of recommendation, I had one professor who I had a really good relationship with from undergrad who I used also. So just because it's a little bit older, if it's still a good rec and you did research with them, I think it would still be a good person to include. Your application does not process faster if you're a reapplicant. They're still going to compare your same grades to the transcript that you have. So you have to resend a new transcript and everything, and you're still be in the same line, unfortunately. You don't have to wait for your MCAT score to submit your application. So I submitted my application before my MCAT score came one time, and that's the time that I wasn't happy with the MCAT score, and I decided to withdraw because my application had not processed and it hadn't been sent to the schools. I didn't count as a reapplicant the next year, and there is a space on the application to say, these are my MCAT scores, and then they'll ask, are you expecting another MCAT score and when? So that's fine. What about a low BPCM? Definitely want to know how your trajectory looks from undergrad from the beginning of undergrad to the end. And if you did any master's or graduate work or post-bac, keep in mind that that also would be on your trajectory, and it would be looked at a little bit more heavier than undergrad. How recent should your letter of recommendation be? I had one that was written, so the year that I withdrew my application, I had one that was written from that year, and I needed to use it the next year with my committee letter. So it was a year old, and I don't think that was ideal, but because I had other letters and it wasn't just that person, it ended up being okay. But it should be someone from like the last couple years or in your undergrad experience, not Like if you had a relationship with someone just in high school, that probably shouldn't be one of your letter writers unless you've continued research with them throughout undergrad. In my undergrad, I did a committee letter, so should I ask them if they still have the rec from years ago? I doubt the professor still has it since it was 8 years ago. I would check with your committee. That's who ended up giving me the letter from the previous undergrad instructor who I had a recommendation from, because I just thought it would look really unprofessional and a little bit weird to email her again the next year. So yeah, so I did ask my committee and that would be fine. Are you still considered a reapplicant if you never submitted a secondary? If your primary application went through and processed and you had to withdraw from the application process after it was already approved, that you are considered a reapplicant. Reapplicants are considered for MCAS or each school. So schools will see if your primary has been submitted before. So you're a reapplicant by MCAS. I know that they can see you are a reapplicant, but I'm not sure if they have access to your previous application. Do not use the same personal statement. There should be some changes or growth that you've used. I'm sorry, some changes or growth that you've had. So there should be pretty significant differences between those statements. This is my personal pet peeve and also difficult to fix. What is your advice about a personal statement that sounds possessive? I did my first 2 drafts and realized I was using the word I constantly. I tend to steer more towards terms like my research team or my team because they know you're a part of the team, or I kind of use my instead of I. There's going to be some times when you use I in it, but I think if you have someone editing and tell them, hey, I want to eliminate some of these I's, can you help me change them to my's or my team or we or something else besides just I. Low BCPM is not the only thing that goes into consideration. If you have a lot of experiences or recent, again, that trajectory is moving up, a good overall GPA, those are things that are also going to be considered. But I think you do need to address that at some point in your personal statement or in like one of your activities if you're talking about any study groups or things that you've done. That's something that you do need to, or that I would recommend that you address and don't kind of just leave it. We'll do the last 2 or 3 questions, and then if anyone else has any questions, I will be open to emailing you guys. Hopefully the person saw my email above, drjclay, the number 2, the letter B @gmail.com. Heard an application to not have a lot of clinical experience. 200 to 300 hours is a lot of clinical experience, so I think you're fine on that front. Can you use the previous letter of recommendation? That I am not sure about. I think it should be fine, but send me an email, Mike, and I'll have to check with one of my advisors about that. How about if you had a perfect application with amazing GPA and activities with a really low MCAT score? If you are a reapplicant, do you still need to change the personal statement? It's not fair that the MCAT score weighs as heavily as it does, but that is what it is. So if you have a really low MCAT score, I'm not sure what you mean by really low, and you don't have to put it on here because that's your business, but I think that again is something that you'd want to talk to a pre-med advisor about. I know people who have gotten into schools with lower MCAT scores, but they had a crazy amount of personal experiences, like started their own like health related businesses and things like that. So if you want to talk more specifically about that, you can send me an email. Again, if I don't know the answer, I do work with a physician mentor who also does pre-med advisement, and I can refer you to her specifically about that one. how would you recommend writing the disadvantage statement without sounding like a pity story? What I wrote about mostly was like my experiences having to do work study or like financial backgrounds, but that it instilled a work ethic with me and like a sense of responsibility and helped me with time management. So those are all things, different ways that you can spin it, is again, including lessons that you learned that are gonna make you a prepared medical student. So I think that's all the questions from the chat. If you had questions in Q&A, I will type those out for you if they haven't been answered yet, because I want to be respectful of other people's time. So if I haven't answered your questions in the Q&A, I'll type those out.
All right.
That's all I
Thanks
have.
so much, Jessica,
Thanks.
for a great presentation. Everyone,
No
say thanks to
problem.
Jessica.
No
Like
problem,
she
Des.
said, she did provide us with her email address. So it's going to be drjclay2b@gmail.com. And then you guys can find this presentation and the recording of the video on PreMed STAR. So go ahead and keep an eye out for that. Make sure you update your guys' profiles for recruiters to see. And tune in next week at the same time for webinar number 3 of our application bootcamp series. All right, so have a great night, guys.